What we're doing is we're looking at a D5C that has a bad coolant leak. Operator says it leaks about half a gallon of coolant a day. And we're going to go try to find out where this coolant leak's coming from. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take and we're going to pressurize the coolant system. The thing's been sitting here all night and it's cold, and that's usually the best time to try to find, a lot of coolant leaks are what they call cold water leaks. So when the thing's cold, it'll leak, and once it gets warm, it won't leak anymore. So we want to check it while it's cold. So a lot of these have a hand pump kind of a thing that you can pump them by hand. Stant makes a nice little kit that you can buy. Of course, you got to buy a lot of extra little adapters and things to go with it. I built me one and I put a shop air to it, put a gauge and a pressure regulator on it so you can dial up what kind of pressure you want. You put a shutoff valve in there if you want to. You can do anything you want to do, but this way you can keep a lot of pressure on it, and then you can go hunting for your leaks. You don't have to stand there and pump it up all the time. Make sure your pressure regulator works good. So with any problem, you have the 3 C's. And you have the complaint, the cause, and a correction. So the complaint was that it was leaking half a gallon of coolant a day. So the cause is what we're going to go try to find right now as to what's going on with this thing. And then we're going to correct it and get it back on its feet. This little tractor's got multiple problems. It's got a coolant leak, it's got a hydraulic leak at the hydraulic pump, and it's got 3 cylinders that need rebuilt. So in this video, we're going to look at the cooling system, and we're going to look at the hydraulic pump, what's leaking on the hydraulic pump, and then we'll probably make another one on rebuilding the 3 cylinders in the front. So a lot of times, for years and years, I've always walked around with a 5/16 boxed in combination wrench in my pocket, just because about 80% of coolant leaks are loose hose clamps. Hose clamps get ignored all the time. A good PM, preventive maintenance for a piece of equipment once a year, is to walk through the thing and to tighten up all the hose clamps when you're changing all the fluids and filters. No matter what, just reach down and grab a hold of all the hose clamps and just snug them up, because they work loose. The only clamps that I have seen that don't give a lot of trouble, Breeze makes these clamps, and you see they got bell washers on them. So when you tighten them up, it actually crushes this little spring, and that little spring will keep that clamp tight for an extended period of time. They also have an inside liner in them that is made for silicone hose. So usually you'll see where these ribs are sticking out, and you might even see the hose protruding through the ribs. Well, if you look inside of here, you'll see where there's a liner in there. So if you have silicone hose or anything like that, you need to use a hose clamp that's got a liner in it. These are really good clamps. You can get them anywhere, but they're really, really good clamps. The other thing is, too, is with the diesel engine, they use an embittered coolant that has nitrates in the coolant. So as the coolant starts getting depleted, you need to make sure that you put good coolant back in at a 50-50 mix, so that number one, it's 34 degrees below zero, and number two, that it's embittered with nitrates. If there's not enough nitrates in the coolant system, as the diesel engine is running, it forms little air bubbles around the bottom of the liners, what they call electrolysis, and it actually attacks the liners and it'll eat holes all the way through it. So you need to take, Caterpillar makes this little test kit. They also make ones with little drops, just like checking the pool water in your swimming pool. So you take these little test strips and you stick them in the radiator, you pull it out, you hold it up against the side of the jar, and it tells you what percentage of nitrate that you need and what percentage is in the coolant that you have now. So they make pre-charged bottles of nitrate that you can dump into the radiator to bring that level up, or you can dump the whole system and start out with fresh, or however you decide to do it. But you really need to pay close attention to the nitrates in your coolant so that you don't have electrolysis going on inside of your engine block that you can't see. I saw a case backhoe one time that had electrolysis so bad that it ate the water pump housing, and it also ate some of the freeze plugs out of the head. That's how bad it was. It was attacking it something terrible, and why, I don't know, but that was a 580 case backhoe years ago, but that thing, it was just ate up with electrolysis. I also saw a great big Cummins one time. It was a low flow Coolant 400 that had less than 60,000 miles on it in an over-the-road truck, and when we took the liners out of it, the liners were completely ate up in the bottom because the thing had a coolant leak and people kept putting coolant in it, but they didn't put embittered coolant in it, and it ate the engine up. So you really want to pay attention to your coolant, what kind of coolant, your nitrate level of the coolant, and you also want to go through and look at your hose clamps and things like that. I just got done looking at this and determined that all the hose clamps are loose. And I've already been through there and I've started tightening them all up. But I noticed another problem. I also took a screwdriver and I went back and forth on the fan to make sure, even though the water pump's not leaking, to make sure the bearing in the water pump is not bad or squalling. But I'm going to walk you around here and I'm going to show you what I found as far as what I think that the cause of the problem is. So if you go right here and you look at this water pump and these fan belts, you see the fan belts are riding high, but you look at where the adjustment is on the alternator, it's all the way out. And you look at the tension on the belts, they're still pretty loose. You can take and move that fan with your hand. So what I'm thinking is that the thing's slowly starting to overheat. We got loose hose clamps, plus the thing is slowly starting to overheat, and these belts are the wrong length. You can see where they're riding in the pulley right here. They're riding tall in the pulley. The pulleys all look good, but the length of the belt, there's no way that the length of that belt can be right to be in that good a shape and be all the way out on that adjuster like that and still be able to slip that fan. So the other thing I looked at was how clean the front of the radiator was, and it's clean. Very well taken care of machine, but we're going to need to look into that and get the right belts on it, and we'll go back and we'll check the coolant in the thing, and we'll check the nitrates and make sure everything's right before we finish up that little project. The other project is going to be this hydraulic pump right here. So we got to looking at it, and this hydraulic pump, the suction pipe is on the bottom. The discharge is on the top. It's a gear pump. So there's an O-ring. This is a flat face O-ring fitting. That O-ring and that fitting is bad. The way I found that was my handy dandy little mirror and my little Milwaukee flashlight, which I would not leave home without it. I don't know how many of them I went through already, but for $25, it's your best friend. You put that in your pocket, and anytime you need to go down and see something, you can see it. But I put this mirror underneath of that fitting, and I shine that light right in that mirror, and when you sneak that mirror under there, you can see exactly what's going on. I got to show you this one because this is my favorite. I always brag about my favorite stuff. This is a Blue Point. And man, oh man, look at that. You can reach out and touch somebody with that mirror. But you take an excavator or something where you really got to reach down in there in a long ways to try to find out what's going on. And these little pin lights are so bright that you can shine it 4 feet away from you and look down in there and try to figure out which one of them fittings is leaking. Real nice tool. Snap-on did a good job when they built that. And it's heavy duty, and it's got a lot of nice extension to it, and I really do like it. But that's how I found that particular fitting was leaking. The next thing I'm going to show you is the suction coming to that pump comes right off the bottom of the hydraulic tank. So what's going to happen when I take that fitting off of there, I'm going to lose all my hydraulic oil, right? Yep. So you can buy these. This I bought from Caterpillar, and they call it a transducer, and you hook it to shop air, and it's got a relief if the pressure gets too high. But what it does is it takes air pressure and turns it into a vacuum down here. And this nice little fitting here, you can stick in your hydraulic tank, and when you crank this down, it tightens this up and it swells this rubber out into the hydraulic tank to make a good seal. So you screw it in there, plug your air hose into it, leave your air run for a while, and it'll start pulling a vacuum on your hydraulic tank, so that when you pull that suction line off of that pump, you're not going to lose all your oil. I don't want to lose any oil. The more oil you lose, the more oil you got to put back in it, you know. But as soon as I take and pull that line off, once I get a vacuum on it and I pull that line off, I'm going to need to try to plug it pretty quick with a plastic cap or something like that, so that, you know, this thing's going to pull a vacuum on a tank, but if it just keeps gurgling and gurgling and gurgling, sooner or later oil's going to start coming out. So as fast as I can, I'm going to try to put a plug in there and plug that line until I get a new O-ring put on that fitting, and make sure that that fitting is in good shape before I put the line back on. Anytime I buy a hose from, you know, every time you get a good hose from somebody that's decent making hoses, if they're decent at making a hose, when you get that hose, it's going to have a cap in the end of it, or it's going to have a plug in the end of it, and it's going to be cleaned. They take, when they get done making a hose, and they blow little foam plugs through the hose to clean the inside of the hose out, so that when they're cutting the hose, anything that might have shot down inside of that hose got cleaned out. Well, anybody that's good at building a hose knows that either the end of it, when you get it, is wrapped in plastic. After it's been cleaned, it's wrapped in a plastic, or it's got a plug in it, or there's something to keep that hose clean until you put it on. So if you're buying hoses from somebody and you watch them make a hose, and they go over to the machine and they just cut the hose off, and they put oil on it, and they put a new end in it, and they crimp it, and they hand it to you and say, here's your hose, the first thing I would do is I would look at them and say, are you going to clean my hose? Because you know that hose is dirty. If you were in a pinch and you had a machine that was down, and somebody brings you a hose that you had to send out to no man's land to pick the thing up and bring it back to you, you get it back and you see there's no plugs in there, and you don't have one of them guns that blows foam plugs through the hose to clean it, then the best way I found to do it would be to take a can of starting fluid, stand the hose up kind of on a long angle, and start hosing the whole inside of that hose out with starting fluid, and try to catch everything that comes out of it and see, by chance, was there anything left in it, any dirt, any kind of grit, any kind of anything. So it's real important to do that. The other thing too is that when you see a lot of places, they got bulk hose, it's laying on the floor, people walking by, and the dust off your shoes gets in the end of that hose, and you know, if that hose has not been cleaned, it's a bad deal. One little bit of grit in a hydraulic system is just a real bad deal. So always pay attention to your hoses and make sure that they're clean. Make sure that all your fittings are capped when you take something off. Make sure you cap everything. Can't stress that enough. But one little tip is if you get you a good little Milwaukee flashlight and a 5/16 combination wrench, and you stick it in your pocket, you'll find out that you use it a lot more than what you think. So we're going to go through here and we're going to tighten up all the hose clamps, top it off with coolant. We're going to get a new set of belts. We're going to run it. But I think that if we go back to our 3 C's, the complaint, the cause, and the correction, I think that we found the cause being the loose clamps and the fan belts, and the correction is going to be to fix that, top it off, check the nitrates. And this particular machine's got a heater on it, so I'm going to go up there and I'm going to take all the heater hoses that go to the heater, even though it's shut off at the block right now. It's got heater shut-off valves on it, but even though it's shut off, I'm still going to go back there and tighten up all those hose clamps that goes to that heater, because I know sooner or later somebody's going to get cold and they're going to turn them heater valves on, and then you know, if those clamps weren't tightened up, then you're right back in the same boat you started from. Nothing worse than having somebody bring something back and say, hey, you fixed that, but it still leaks. You don't never want that. So we got that hydraulic hose, that steel tube O-ring replaced. But I'll tell you what, if it hadn't have been for these crow's feet, I would have never got it off of there. They've got the frame and the engine block right there. Well, the one's an inch and 13/16 and the other one's an inch and 7/8. And you got to take both of them loose to get that O-ring out of there. So if I hadn't had a set of them, I'd have really been in trouble, because I would have not have been able to get it out of there. Matter of fact, it was so tight, I beat on it with a punch about a dozen times, and then I had to get a cheater pipe and put on the end of this breaker bar. That's how tight that thing was on there. So just to show you, you know, these are they're not expensive. These are not snap-on or anything. The name of them is Grip. They're cheap, but I've got a set of them that goes from 1 1/16 all the way up to 2 inch. I think there's a total of 13 of them. And man, if you don't have a set of them and you get a job like this, you're just going to be in trouble, because you're not going to be able to get it apart. I think when I bought these, I bought 2 sets. I put 1 set in the shop and I put 1 set in my service truck. But they're nice to have, especially when you get into something like this where you can't get to it. I'm going to grab that camera and I'm going to push it down in here, and I'm going to show you where this line is and how close to the frame it is, so you'll understand what we had to go through to get it to tighten up. So right here you'll see this line. This is a suction line, this is a discharge line, and the frame is right here. So there's no room in here to do anything. So the only way you can get in there is to get in there with a crow's foot. So I had one in here holding this fitting like this, and then the other one on the other side getting that broke loose to get it out of there, because there's just no room in there. If you don't have one of these, you're not going to get that out of there. But we took it out, we put a new O-ring in it, and we've wiped it off. We're going to see if it leaks now, but I think we're going to be good to go. But here again, I show you, see, the alternator spins free, fan spins free. So we're going to get them other belts, and we'll get them belts put on there, and hopefully everything will be all right. So we took this belt and we cut it in half, and we wrapped it around our pulleys with the alternator adjustment all the way in, and we cut off until we think that it fit really well. So we ended up cutting out about 2 1/4 inches is what we cut out of it. So we made sure that would fit on there decent. So then we took and take a tape measure, and you measure it. So it's a 1/2 inch wide belt. You measure the length of the belt across the back, and it comes out to about 46 3/4. So we're going to call that 47. So what the belts that we need are 1/2 by 47. So That's the way I do it. You can also just take this with you when you go and get your new belts and make sure it lines up right, which it will. But a 1/2 inch wide's the back, 47 inches long across the back. So if you're out someplace and you don't know how to measure a belt, that's how you measure it. The other thing that there's a couple bolts that go in a fan shroud that holds the two fan shrouds together in different positions, and one of them you can't hardly get to it to hold it. So what I like to do is I take a piece of a paper shop towel and I stuff it on top of my socket, and I take my bolt, I stick my bolt in my socket and I tap on it. I'll guarantee you that's not going to fall off on you when you try to get your bolt up in your fan shroud. If you don't like the excess, you can go around and tear the excess off, but it makes it pretty handy when you go to put your bolts in. I've got magnetic sockets, but you know, this works just as good. You can see how tight it is in there. It's not going to fall off. And then once you get it started and you take it off, you take the paper shop towel off of it, you can see it falls right off of your socket. So makes life a little easier for you, especially if you got something way down someplace and you got to get down in there and get it started. So just a little tip there to help you sometime, whatever you're doing. We'll take you around here. I'm going to show you, we got our new belts put on it this morning. I'm going to show you where the adjustment on the alternator is now. So if you look right here, we're where we belong now. We got our new belts on here. We got our fan shroud put back on. But we're not clear out here, and they're tight. They're good and tight. Next video on showing you taking all of these cylinders apart. The two swing cylinders on the front, and then the tilt cylinder here in the middle. All these, you can see how much oil is running out of them. So kind of a mess. All the wipers are deteriorated and gone. This one here, you can see all the oil laying down here on the frame. It's been leaking quite a while. But we're going to get all them off, and we're going to show you how to do one. They're all three made the same. So we're going to show you how to do one of them, and then you'll know how to do the rest by yourself there. So hope you liked the video. Thanks for watching.